Hey, it's Yash, and in this final lesson, we're going to talk about one of the most powerful but also complex features in Clay, HTTP API. We're going to show you how we use HTTP API in our core demo table to actually create custom memes based on somebody's social profile. But before we dive into the details and nuances of how to use HTTP API, it's important to understand what HTTP API even means, especially for those who are less technically informed. HTTP API is effectively our way of ensuring that Clay can connect to any tool on the internet as long as that tool has built the ability for you to connect to it elsewhere. APIs are the language of software on the web. They essentially allow different software tools to communicate information and data between each other and utilize each other's services in a programmatic way. This gets a little technical. It's slightly beyond the realm of no code. I would put this in the low code category. 90% of the time, you're going to be using HTTP API without JWT authentication. You'll only use the JWT authentication if the API you're connecting to requires JWT authentication. Otherwise, the core basics between the two are very similar. In HTTP API, there are a couple of things worth noting. 1. Templates. We have a series of pre-made templates for you to use with some of the most common tools that we don't yet natively connect to in Clay. If you don't see one that you want added to the templates, let us know and we'll see if we can build it for you so you can reuse it anywhere in your Clay tables. 2. Reusable configurations. You can save any of your own HTTP API configurations as a template for yourself to reuse throughout your other tables and columns in Clay. And finally, 3. AI assistance. Something we just added to Clay is the ability to get AI-assisted HTTP API calls. Now, you can simply put in your API endpoint and let HTTP API do the rest of the initial configuration for you. Now let's actually get into how we use HTTP API in Clay. In this lesson, we're going to cover how we use HTTP API to access and create custom memes on demand for people we may want to reach out to. To do that, I first need a meme making API. You can see here, my meme making API of choice is ImageFlip. It's one of the most popular meme making platforms on the web. Also, it's a very simple API. You don't even need an API authentication key or anything else to access all of the free parts of the ImageFlip API, which make it incredibly useful. For this video, if you're accessing an API with authentication, all you'll need to do is make sure you include an authentication key, a bearer token, or some other form that lets the API know you have the rights to access the data you're trying to retrieve. But to keep it simple, we're just going to do 2 simple HTTP API calls to the ImageFlip API here. First, I'm going to need to get the list of free memes that I can create programmatically without having a paid plan. This setup is very simple. I just have the URL endpoint that I need to hit. The method here is a get, which I'll explain in just a second. Once I input that get method and that get memes endpoint, I have a list of memes that I could possibly create in Clay. Note that each of these memes have several different variables: meme ID, name of the meme, URL of the core meme, width and height, and then box count, which is the default number of text boxes that meme uses. Some memes have more than one text box. You might have 2, 3, 4, or 5 different text inputs. So in our final flow, we actually configured custom settings based on whichever meme is selected to account for the number of text inputs that it takes. Now, in our actual meme creation process, we're using AI to generate the text for the meme itself. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But then, our final step in this meme creation process will be, once we've generated the text to use in that meme, to actually create the meme, which is where we're going to use our other HTTP API endpoint, which is caption image, to actually overlay the text that we want on top of our desired meme. That's what you can see in these 4 columns right here. Now, In order to get the caption meme endpoint, I would use this URL and the post method, which we'll return to shortly. The caption image endpoint requires a little bit more input than our get request did, because with get, we could simply make a call and receive a response. For the caption image endpoint, I need to also include template ID and my own username and password, as well as, at a minimum, text 0 and text 1, which are the top and bottom text for a meme, and potentially boxes for all these additional other text inputs. If I want to use memes that have more than 2 text inputs, the documentation requires that I use the boxes parameter. This parameter allows you to custom define exactly how many text boxes are going into your meme. I'll show you how we took advantage of that to make fully custom memes in just a second. Now I know what I need to do in Clay to get my memes into the platform and start generating memes with AI. First, I'm going to make this HTTP API call in the Get Memes table to get a list of possible free memes. It's very straightforward, just a GET request to that endpoint that we saw earlier. 99% of the time that you're using HTTP API in Clay, you'll use either GET or POST. GET retrieves information from an API, POST sends information to an API. You'll notice you also have patch, put, or delete options, but don't worry about them for now unless you're performing more advanced data modification operations with your API connections. Now, you can see here in the results, the result that I get from this GET endpoint is a list of 100 memes. While interesting and useful, it's not really practical, once again, when it's all in one cell in a table. So I'm going to use our handy dandy write to table to ensure each of these memes is represented as its own row of data in a separate table here in my meme list. Now I have the name of the meme, the ID, the total number of text inputs, and the URL format of the raw meme in a separate list. Now we're ready to start programmatically generating our memes. When people fill out a form on this table during a live demo, we perform a whole host of different enrichments to showcase the power and functionality of Clay. The final fun touch of this table is that we select a number randomly from 0 to 99, because there's 100 different types of memes that we've gathered, and then we use the math.floor and math.random number on the company name to get this random integer. That random integer becomes the random meme that we generate and select for the person at choice. For example, I might pick the 61st meme in the list, or the 43rd, or the 21st. Here you can see the last 3 memes we generated were the 16th, 99th, and 18th respectively. From that, we can look up the meme name from our meme list table and then get the meme ID as well. Once we have the meme ID and the box count, we've got everything we need for the API inputs in order to get the custom built meme. Now, I've randomly selected a meme, obtained the meme name, retrieved its ID, and noted the total number of text inputs that the meme requires. This is where we'll get into some fun conditional logic and AI generation in Clay. Using AI, I generate only as many snippets of text as the meme requires, dynamically adjusting based on the box count. You can see in the prompt here, that means I'm creating 2, 3, 4, or 5 snippets of text in these separate text categories, depending on whether or not the meme requires 2, 3, 4, or 5 outputs of text. In the Claude Opus model that I'm using here, I've created these 5 different output fields and defined them as such. Note that I only need the minimum number of text that the boxes require. It doesn't matter if some of these fields remain unused. Next, I created 4 different HTTP API calls for memes with 2, 3, 4, and 5 text inputs. In each of these, I'm making the same post request to the same endpoint and inputting the necessary parameters: template ID, username and password, boxes, and the total text inputs for each box. The only difference among these different HTTP API calls is that if the box count is 3, 4, or 5, I add additional boxes and text inputs for each of those calls. The way that I'm ensuring that we only run the HTTP API call that we need to for a given row is by using our conditional runs to add where the box count is only exactly the same as the total number of inputs for the call needed. Once we run all 4 of these HTTP API calls, we merge the values from each of these columns into one final meme column, which yields some pretty interesting results. Let's take a look at some of the last memes created. We'll take a look at one for myself. Yash's impressive resume, 16 jobs, 5,683 connections, awards and certifications. Also Yash, an expert generalist who will try anything once. Funny meme. I could go on and on here and show a bunch of different memes. Feel free to look at our meme generator on the Clay website. But we've got all sorts of things we're doing with HTTP API here. And hopefully this demonstrates just a little bit of how custom and powerful this flexible addition to your tool stack can be. That's everything we've got for HTTP API. We'll see you next just to close out Clay 101 together.